and I looked up and I saw my son laying face down on the porch.
People feel helpless. A lot of times they feel hopeless.
We take that stuff personal. I take it personal. It's my city.
I'm sorry that I wasn't a better person.
This is probably the biggest scientific boon right now.
Our number one priority that we all can buy into is that the gun violence must stop.
Almost every day, we tell you about someone who's been shot, stabbed, or assaulted here in central Illinois. Some of those attacks are deadly. Tonight, we dive deep into the causes of that violence, the effect on victims, and what we can all do to pursue peace. You can see it in these snapshots, the sweet eyes, the bright smile.
Ashton was, out of all my kids, my grandma said he was the one that she would always watch because he was the most content, never gave us any problems, tender-hearted, he was a good kid.
Ashton Gray grew up in Decatur. His mom, Jira Gentry, says when his grandma died, it hit him hard.
Turned to things in the street, alcohol. He was incarcerated, but when he got there, he decided this is not going to be my life.
When he got out, his mom says he found work and found a plan.
He was proud of that job. He said, "Mama, I know it's just Burger King, but it's a start." His mind was, I'm going to have a job. I'm going to sign up for classes at Richland and establish a career. I think he was mostly talking about getting his CDLs and going into over-the-road truck driving.
But last fall, Jira's family got a call. Someone had fired shots. The caller didn't know where Ashton was. Jira and another son took off looking.
I mean, it's dark. September, it's about 8:20, and we got flashlights on our phone out. We're looking for him, and my 20-year-old yelled out, "Mama, there he is." And I can still hear, I'm sorry. I can still hear how his voice sounded. I looked over to the direction that he was running to. It was a vacant house next door. And I looked up and I saw my son laying face down on the porch steps. So I took off running and my son rolled him over. And I lifted up his shirt and we saw one bullet hole in his chest, like in his left lung. And my 20-year-old just freaked and walked behind me. I put pressure on there. I just started pounding on his chest. The paramedics were able to get a pulse back for a while. So we went to the hospital, nervous. I'm expecting him to get stabilized and airlifted to a level 1 trauma center. The doctor came out and I already knew why. I just went down to the ground.
Since the early 90s, violent crime rates have dropped by half across the country. They fall into 20-year lows in cities like Decatur, too. And yet, violence here still claims the lives of people like Ashton every year. In 2017, FBI statistics show 864 aggravated assaults in Springfield, 275 aggravated assaults in Decatur, 506 in Champaign and Urbana, and 412 in Danville. The same stats for 2017 show 10 homicides in Danville, 5 in Champaign, 10 in Decatur, and 11 in Springfield.
Each one of those individuals, they could have lived a full life. They could have, been maybe a state representative or a doctor or an attorney. Who knows, if a person lives out a full life.
Coroner's data from the past 2 years shows most homicide victims in central Illinois died of gunshot wounds. In 2017 and 2018, 17 out of 33 homicide deaths in Sangamon County involved gunshots. In Macon County, 14 out of 20. In Champaign County, 19 out of 25. In Vermilion County, 21 out of 25. Those numbers are based on the places victims died, including those brought to trauma centers from other counties.
With the gun, there's less personalization there. You can shoot somebody from 20 feet away, 25 feet away. There's less personalization with it, and it's easy to pull a trigger.
Local police tell us despite Illinois laws that regulate guns and gun owners, our cities are awash in illegal weapons, many of them stolen.
We definitely see a lot of weapons that were taken in burglaries. We also see straw purchase weapons, which would be getting someone else to buy these guns for you.
How about the guns that are stolen that never get reported stolen? But we come across that, where a gun, you know it doesn't belong to this person that has it, but it's not reported stolen. What happens, when somebody passes a background and maybe, something didn't show up on the background, but still allows them to get a FOID card, now they end up with a gun.
And while the sources of weapons vary, so do the causes of conflict. Cities like Springfield and Danville report battles between groups called cliques or factions. But authorities say those groups are much different than gangs of the past.
Late 80s, early 90s, you had the Vice Lords and Gangster Disciples that were really prominent in Illinois and Decatur as well. And so, but they did have a hierarchy. They had somebody that was the boss, and they had security people, and they had intel people, and then they had people that would, make sure their subordinates were not bringing negative attention on themselves. They were in it for profit, to make money on drug dealing. So for them to go out and shoot somebody would bring negative attention. It happened, they did that stuff, but it was controlled, and somebody would call those shots. Whereas now, you have these loose affiliations, usually associated with neighborhoods. They get into, arguments or disagreements, whether it be over, somebody's dating, somebody they used to date. They said something negative on social media. There's not really that hierarchy or that one person that says, no, we're not going to get in a shooting and bring negative attention to ourselves. It's not as organized as it used to be.
Still, those who work in crime prevention say fights between groups are only part of the story.
Still, the overwhelming incidents of gun violence are interpersonal conflict, domestic, and just people solving their disputes with gun violence. The gang clique gun violence that we believe that the perception that is the large driver of gun violence actually isn't. We have to also understand that most of these are driven around economic issues. The need for resources, money, financial support, family support is overwhelmingly the driver in many of these incidents.
Authorities say another factor is fueling those personal conflicts.
It's unbelievable how many of these shootings are attributed back to social media. But that's how, these young kids communicate with each other. So they get disrespected on social media. You disrespected me or my girlfriend or whatever the case may be. Their way of exacting revenge is just picking up a gun and shooting them.
Whatever the source, those attacks can have powerful ripple effects, driving off jobs and investment that are already hard to come by.
It's probably in the top 2 or 3 things that people consider about moving into a community or a business, coming into a community. We have enough challenges in Illinois just because we're in Illinois to get, to draw business from outside of the state to come here.
More importantly, that violence cuts lives short and shatters families.
What I'm feeling, it's unfamiliar territory. We've all grieved, lost people. I've buried my mother when I was a teenager, and grandparents and friends and other relatives. This is unfamiliar territory. I've never experienced anything like this. I'm not better. I'm different. Grief doesn't go away, it changes.
A lot of the data we're using in this report comes from larger communities like Champaign, Decatur, and Springfield, but smaller communities deal with violence as well, and those crimes leave their own trails of heartache and pain. Coming up next,
we had this total ripple effect that happened because of one incident.
we'll show you how violence affects children and the lasting scars victims bear. And later, we'll show you the high-tech efforts to get the most dangerous criminals off our streets. Tonight, after this broadcast, please join us for a live panel discussion about community violence. You can take part through our WAND News Center 17 Facebook page.
Violent attacks can take just seconds, but the pain they inflict can last a lifetime, and victims say healing help is often out of reach.
It hurts to lose someone. Not to see their face. Not to hear their voice. But Jira Gentry says losing her son Ashton to a shooting brought a new kind of pain.
It's hard to deal with the mental part of it and trying to cope and trying to find ways to cope. Not being able to show weakness in front of my kids because when I do, it makes them cry or it makes them angry, and trying to keep them calm. So I can't cry when I need to cry. Sometimes I have to wait until my kids are asleep or gone, or get in my car at nighttime and scream and just drive way out so I can cry.
Ashton's death has hit his siblings hard too.
I'm proud of them. They've been strong. They don't want to hurt anybody. I've seen them break down, though, a couple of them. When you're a mother and you see your grown sons cry in front of you, I need a minute.
For half a year, OSF Healthcare has run a trauma recovery center at this nondescript building in Peoria. They offer counseling for families who've lost loved ones to violence and survivors of violent crime. As you'll hear, they use noise machines to protect patient privacy.
People can experience nightmares. They might not be able to sleep as well. Those are really common symptoms. Irritability is high because post-trauma, a lot of the time people are hypervigilant. So basically they're on edge all the time. They might be reliving the experience, having flashbacks, and when you're constantly on edge and you constantly have those stress hormones flooding through your body, it makes even simple interactions, even harmless interactions, potentially seem more threatening.
This center is one of only 2 in the state. Both are grant funded. Supervisor Sarah McCafferty says the help they offer can change lives.
Being able to get out of bed in the morning, being able to take a shower and get dressed, I mean, that is success for a lot of people when trauma has affected them so much that they've been not able to get out of bed. They haven't gone to work. They haven't eaten or showered. I mean, they've become non-functional in that sense. So we start with the very basics.
Thank you all for coming.
Last month, crime victims rallied at the Illinois Capitol. They called for more services like that recovery center in Peoria.
When people are victims of violent crime, they need a place to go. When you're cut and you're bleeding, you have a place to go. But when you have been harmed and you are depressed and you don't have any idea how to get up the next day, you need a place to go.
Some described the aftermath of losing a loved one.
I suffered with delusions and hallucinations. One day, I even followed a car that I thought had my son's killer in that car. I can't tell you today why I did what I did.
Survivors want what happened to them not to happen to them again. 2, they want what happened to them not to happen to anyone else. And 3, they want help and healing for their communities.
Those who survive violent crime face many challenges, losing physical abilities, jobs, homes, and more. Jesse Clifton is a victim advocate for the Champaign County State's Attorney's Office.
For serious injuries, those don't just end once somebody's been convicted of a crime. For somebody who is now in a wheelchair, they may have to completely redesign their house so that they have a ramp and it's accessible according to their disability. It's up to them to figure out how can I continue to work despite this injury?
Even the process of bringing criminals to justice can be painful for victims.
You're coming into an office with strangers and you may have to recount your story to somebody who's may seem analytical, or to them they're taking notes, and the victim may have to recount their story multiple times just before a trial to prepare for that.
Still, some victims' families go years without justice or answers.
These kids need to think.
Since losing her son, Jira has connected with Jamie Binkley. Jamie lost her stepdaughter's brother, Caleb Whitty, to a murder in 2011. No one has been arrested for that murder.
They were able to locate the gun. It was the same gun involved with the Billy Rutherford case. They've got someone in jail for 25 years for having the gun, but...
In the years since the murder, Jamie has researched other unsolved murders.
Then I look and see that no one really says anything. It's like they're just forgotten. Then you realize that maybe it's hard for some of the parents. Maybe every year when it's not solved, and to go out and remind people, it also brings it back up for them.
I can tell you that the detectives are following every lead they have, and so sometimes you just exhaust all your leads and there's nothing else to follow up on. Caleb Whitty, for example, we've exhausted every single, we've talked to a lot of people. Whenever we get a lead on it, we follow up on it, and we just don't get anything. It hasn't led anywhere. We hope someday that somebody's going to come forward with some information that'll help us solve the case. We hope that for all of our unsolved cases, but it's not through lack of effort.
One problem? Fear of being targeted by others after sharing information with police.
You may not want to put your name on it, but you can still get us the information through Crime Stoppers. The only way somebody's going to find out that you gave us information through Crime Stoppers is if you tell them.
For all the challenges victims of violence face, researchers say the line between victim and perpetrator can be blurry. Criminologists call that the victim-offender overlap, and they have different theories to explain it. Some argue it's passed down generation to generation, as children learn to solve problems with violence. Others argue it's a routine or lifestyle learned by children who aren't supervised and learn violence from peers. Still others argue violence is a coping response to strain. But researcher Jessica Reichert says clear evidence is hard to come by.
I scoured journals to find some of the answers, like, are these theories true? And I didn't find a whole lot. There were some that supported it's learned, and there are individual studies on smaller groups of people, so it's hard to apply that to everybody.
Still, community violence has impact beyond victims and offenders.
Keegan, what's another fraction you came up with?
It even has an impact here.
How many 12?
Students are very knowledgeable when it comes to things that are happening in the community. A lot of times they hear things before we even hear about them.
For the youngest in our communities, violence at home or down the street can make it hard to learn.
They may be reserved that day. They may be withdrawn that day. And also they may even come into the school with aggression themselves because some of the things that they've experienced. There is a specific instance that happened here in Decatur not too long ago, and we deployed resources in all of our secondary schools as well as some of our elementary schools because kids knew the young man who was a victim of gun violence. They were related to him, had played basketball with him, knew the parents, knew some of the other siblings, and so we had this total ripple effect that happened because of one incident.
As we'll see soon, those ripple effects can lead to more violence and more loss.
If you have information on a violent crime and you'd like to share it anonymously with authorities, you can contact Crime Stoppers at 217-423-8477.
We're communicating to the administration.
Up next,
I'm going to go tie this man up, I'm going to rob him of his stuff, and I'm going to run away and be happily ever after, and I have no more pains. That's not how it went.
we head behind bars to learn what leads people to acts of violence. And later,
be someone they can look up to. Give them a positive word.
what each of us can do to stop violence in our communities.
We've already heard that many violent attacks start with personal conflict, but we wanted to know what causes those conflicts to turn violent. To find the answers, we head behind bars.
That's not effective communication.
It's Friday at the Danville Correctional Center.
We're about accountability and responsibility.
Ronaldo Hudson is teaching.
I'm going to respect you.
Hudson helped create a special unit here called the Building Block, where offenders agree to follow prison rules and take part in conversations like this one.
We have a program where the offenders are actually saying to each other, let's stop victimizing each other in this space, right? And then you can begin to do the same thing out there in society.
But before he taught classes, Hudson was a school dropout in Chicago. Eventually, he says he was kicked out of the city as a juvenile delinquent. At 10 years old, he got into a fight with his brother, William. William came back with a gun.
I was hit in the chest, went through the arm, on close range. When I woke up in the hospital, which was maybe a couple weeks later, I discovered that not only had he shot me, but he had killed one of my aunties, killed one of my cousins, and shot up 6 other family members.
A few years later, Ronaldo was living in Chicago with his father. On June 3, 1983, he went to the apartment of a retired carpenter named Folk Peterson. Authorities say Hudson stabbed Peterson dozens of times that night.
Because Mr. Peterson deserved so much more than I gave him. And I thought a man that was living in an apartment up under me had $1 million. That shows you how really slow I was. Like, my brilliance and all my brilliance, right? I was like, I have made it. I'm gonna go tie this man up. I'm going to rob him of his stuff, and I'm gonna run away and be happily ever after, and I have no more pains. That's not how it went.
Ronaldo was convicted of murder, home invasion, and armed robbery, and sentenced to die. Even on death row, he had a rough reputation. During a stay in segregation, a warden made him a deal.
He said to me, for every scripture you learn, I'll take a day off of your seg. And so I learned the shortest scripture in the Bible. Jesus wept. And so when he came back, I hit him with it. I'm like, hey, Jesus wept. He said, okay. I said, I got him. But nope. He was much deeper than I was. He asked me, he said, yeah, he wept, but why? I said, that wasn't part of the deal, right? I don't need to and so we began to have conversations.
Another turning point came with a death row rejection.
This one day, all of my buddies, none of them was on the yard. And so I go to the shower, and one of my buddies was in the opposite shower. I'm like, hey man, what was y'all at? He said, oh, we went to the rec room. It was one of the brothers' birthday. I said, hey, why y'all didn't tell me? He said, Nardo, I don't know how to break this to you, man. The brothers didn't want you there, man. Listen, man, I don't know how many parties you get invited to, man, but to get disinvited to a death row party, like, think about that, like, you disinvited to a death row party. I said, man, you messed up. If guys didn't want you at a death row party, man, like, what is wrong with you? And so that furthered me, like, man, I don't want to be that person.
In the years since, Illinois ended its death penalty, and Ronaldo has earned a diploma from Divine Hope Bible Seminary. He now preaches behind bars and counsels other inmates. In the process, he's learned about the attitudes that lead to violence.
We posed to the guys in this group, say, hey, listen, these are mostly young guys. Like, would you rather be caught with your weapon or without it? And everybody in the beginning of the class said, I'd rather be caught with it than without it. First of all, that's a sign that I won't value you. Because if I have a weapon, chances are I'm going to use it. If something occurs, there's a great chance. And so we said, well, why do you feel like you have to have the weapon? It's because, first of all, I don't feel a part of this community. That's why I'm willing to exterminate people within this community.
Developing brain science may explain that willingness to choose violence.
This is probably the biggest scientific boon right now.
Margaret Thompson and Charmaine Robertson-Stoner are on staff at Crossing Healthcare in Decatur. They point to research into adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs.
If I'm a 1-year-old and I'm living in a chaotic family where mom and dad are fighting all the time, dad has a drug abuse problem, and there's a lot of violence and chaos in the home, what happens is that my stress response as a 1-year-old gets elevated. by continued exposure to those stressful environments. And it doesn't reset that. Over time, that new stress response threshold resets as normal. So now I'm living in a continual state of stress.
Experts say those ACEs can change children's brains, reducing impulse control and leaving them on constant alert.
So I usually explain it to my staff or my class in that it's almost like if you look at the alarm, right? If we are in danger, we want that alarm to go off, right? If there's a fire, we want it to go off. But if it went off all day and there was no real threat of harm, we would get annoyed after a while, right? And so that's what's happening when we have an overactive stress response system. Our amygdala is always going off, and there's always this perceived threat of danger, even if they're not in danger, which then impacts their health over a lifetime.
Juliana Salette is Vice President of Community Health Initiatives at Carle Foundation Hospital.
The more that they're exposed to these adverse events in high-ticket ways, if they're getting it day after day after day, it really does impact the developing brain. And these higher levels of cortisol, these other hormones, adrenaline out there, can impact a child so adversely. Like I said, it changes them physiologically.
They say you can see the results here. The staff at Crossing surveys Macon County jail inmates to see how many ACEs they've had.
And in one study, no one that we screened in the jail scored a 0. So not one person said,
none of those prisoners had a stable house.
Not one of them said, yeah, none of those things have happened to me.
Salette says understanding the effects of that trauma can help address them.
The education sector doing their pieces and having trauma-informed teaching so they know how to respond when a child has been a victim. For us as a health system, it's how do we approach people and not look at folks, from, what's wrong with you to what's happened, to you along the way, and then respond appropriately, knowing their background and where they are in life.
The advantage, of course, of being a child is that you can counteract that feeling of terror just by, a big hug. I've got you, you're safe, it's okay. They don't need to know the macro of global universal violence. They just need to know,
I'm safe.
Mom's here, Dad's here, I'm safe, it's okay.
But not all factors are personal.
They have a whole series of problems in the alleys.
Last month, this group toured Decatur's Old King's Orchard neighborhood.
It's really sad that a lot of the development, a lot of money get poured into other areas a couple blocks away, but then when you go back into the actual neighborhoods, you saw what happened.
Authorities say when neighborhoods are left behind, it can be hard to leave crime behind.
So the economic part becomes critical, because if you have a person who's come out of prison per se, and he or she doesn't have a place to live, he or she can't get a job because businesses won't hire them, they can't get educational opportunities, they've got that weight of the mistakes that they've made that is overwhelmingly what they're judged by and what they have opportunities for, then you help create that environment and need for the subcultures, for money, for resources, for survival. And so that plays an important part. It's not the only driver, but it is a very important one that we have to take ownership on as well as communities.
And there may be another factor, us.
How most people are informed about these things that they know nothing about is through the media. So if the media only sensationalizes the shootings without talking about the whys and what has happened to help create this environment, then the media is part of the problem too.
How many guys consider themselves effective communicators?
Still, Ronaldo says those who commit violence must take responsibility for what they've done.
When everybody starts saying, man, you're doing some good stuff, and man, the stuff y'all doing with the building block and the stuff y'all doing with Divine Hope Reform Bible Seminary, and the way that people actually respond to you, I always go back to, yeah, but Mr. Peterson is in the ground. And we can't minimize that. I think a lot of victim groups need to hear this. Like, all of us aren't just trying to hide. Some of us want to say, and I would like just to say that to people that need to hear that, I'm sorry that I wasn't a better person and that my peers who are afraid or don't have this opportunity, we're sorry. And we want to be a part of breaking that cycle of violence.
Up next,
We want them to know we're aware of who they are, and these actions are no longer tolerable.
The new technology and tactics police are using to bring peace, and later,
the church is going to have to come to the table and work.
The role of faith in fighting community violence.
Police are on the front lines of the fight against violent crime, but new techniques and new technology could help give them the upper hand.
It's Saturday afternoon, and Decatur police are heading out for the night. Officers like these are on the front lines of the battle against violence, but leaders say that work begins before a single shot is fired.
We have good intelligence. Social media is a big help. If we know there's a beef going on between two factions here in Decatur, we're sending the guys out and we're going to deal with those folks.
Chief Jim Getz says building community connections can stop violence before it starts.
For example, if I know there's something going on a certain end of town, but there's somebody in that neighborhood, maybe a pastor, maybe a community organizer, or somebody in the public or in the community that has, some clout over that area, I'm making that phone call.
And yet, sometimes the difference between a shooting and a murder comes down to miles and luck.
There's been years where our shootings were the same. The number of shootings were the same, but yet we had 8 homicides where we only had 2 homicides. Sometimes, it's how close are you to the hospital? Where was the victim shot at? Is it a lethal shot? So things like that play into it.
These days, many police departments are looking to Peoria.
In the early 2000s, that period of time, I think like a lot of the other communities in central Illinois and really throughout the country, the more urban communities were seeing an uptick in gun-related crime.
So Mayor Jim Artis and law enforcement leaders investigated a practice called focused deterrence. It had earned praise in cities like Boston, and it works like this. Find out who the most violent offenders are. Confront them directly. Make clear any further violence comes with stiff consequences. Then use every possible legal tool to put them away when violence happens.
The minute that bullet leaves that barrel, your life and the life of your loved ones have changed forever.
Police do that through call-ins, where offenders are brought in through parole or probation. Peoria held its first call-in in 2012.
The work that they did leading up to that first call-in was pretty spectacular, frankly. And I think that the people that were called in were kind of shocked at the amount of intel that the police were able to put together on each one of them. So they knew that they weren't there by accident.
At the beginning of the call-in, you have the chief of police, the federal prosecutor, the state prosecutor speak first. And their message is, if you unfortunately choose to continue to do violence in Peoria, you're going to deal with us. And they explain some of the things that the federal system can do with gun laws and things like that.
The state's attorney's office was extremely successful in prosecuting not just the shooters, but everybody that was associated with them with a conspiracy angle. And that was what was able to get so many of them really tied up, indicted, and sent to prison.
Through the years, Peoria officials have tailored their approach.
The original model, they said, hey, don't promise them jobs because you don't have jobs. You just need to get them to put the guns down. Well, for us, every time we'd have one of these young men in the room and say, hey, what can we do for you? The answer was almost always the same. I need a job.
We identified them according to their individual problems that they were having and experiencing, not just in their neighborhoods, but now in their own homes. And being that mission-driven force, helping them problem solve, breaking it down and separating that individual from their group association and saying, how can I help this person?
Now the call-ins include meetings with building trades, schools, and services. Through the years, 306 people have gone through those call-ins.
The gangs haven't gone away, but their structure is nowhere near as strong as it used to be. So I think we've had a big impact on the shootings that were specifically gang against gang related.
Other cities are trying focused deterrence too, including Champaign. They've held their own call-ins and offer their own options.
And again, most of these guys are individuals who've not had success, don't have much infrastructure and supports around them. We want, through Fresh Start, to change that, offer them a different course, and hopefully that'll dramatically impact our gun violence in the positive way by eliminating it. Now, the other side of that, of course, is that we want them to know we're aware of who they are. And these actions are no longer tolerable. And we're going to do everything in our ability to rid them of our community if this is the course of action they continue to take.
But research shows that while focused deterrence can yield early results, those programs can falter over time for lack of support. One reason? Success can be hard to measure.
So is it, an individual who's on probation or parole completing that? Is it stopping the violence? Is it neighborhood safety? Or is it a system and structure that allows everyone who wants opportunity for success, a chance at being successful? And so we're still debating that, as most communities are. Our number one priority that we all can buy into is that the gun violence must stop.
I would argue with anybody that would measure success that far back. The totality, the number of shootings or the number of, we're dealing with humans. Once you build those relationships, we see it.
Back in Peoria, police are also relying on technology to track gun violence. One tool, a system called ShotSpotter that uses special sensors to pinpoint gunshots as they happen.
And I can tell you from working third shift, it's hard to sometimes hear where the gunfire's at and determine, obviously you're not going to get exactly where the gunfire is.
We couldn't hire enough police officers to do what ShotSpotter does for us. And ShotSpotter technology is such a good tool for our police department too, because it puts them right on the scene of the shot in literal minute or minutes.
So ShotSpotter leads us to where the casings are or where the victim is. So very important that if you have someone who's shot, the response time for police and Peoria Fire to get there to help the individual goes up with ShotSpotter.
And those shell casings can yield key information. The department has equipment to analyze casings and run them through the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network.
You may get a report back where that gun's been used 7 times over the last 2 years. The intelligence unit comes into play again. So now we have investigated the 6 previous shootings, right? We have a pretty good idea what group, or maybe you had a witness at that time to some other things, and now all of a sudden you have a homicide using that gun. When you combine the ShotSpotter, the NIBIN, and the gang group intelligence, it really, for us, has made a big difference in the focused deterrence strategy.
Still, police say they can only do so much to stop violent crime.
It's a community answer. Police cannot raise children. We don't raise children. And the amount of time that we put into our profession, we barely have the opportunity to raise our own. You start looking for law enforcement to raise children, you're not going to like the outcome.
Up next.
I don't want another parent to feel what I'm feeling. Again, indescribable pain.
How those affected by violent crime are speaking out and making change, and how all of us can help bring peace to our streets.
We've shown what police are doing to fight violent crime, but we wanted to know about the rest of us. What can we do to prevent violence and pursue peace?
It's been nearly 8 months since Ashton Gray was killed.
I think I made up my mind after we laid him to rest, because I have to cope by being active about it. I have to do something. I can't just sit still and not say anything. He's not here, so I have to be his voice.
You hurt me!
In October, his mom, Jira Gentry, held a rally calling for the bloodshed to stop with Ashton.
I don't want another parent to feel what I'm feeling. Again, indescribable pain.
Jira called on schools, churches, law enforcement, and families to help the fight against violence.
Some of these fathers need to step up. You are fathering a child. If you fathered a child, you need to, it's not about you and her. It's about that kid. Whatever you have to do to keep your child, do it. You can't turn a blind eye.
Some are already doing that work. On this day, volunteers at Abundant Life Christian Center in Decatur are stocking up their food pantry. Jesse Bates is presiding apostle here.
For 17 and a half years, I was a major drug dealer here in the region. That last 7.5 years ended up in crack cocaine addiction. And when my life got changed, in Atlanta, Georgia in 1990, God really came into my life and made a dramatic change in my life. And I really felt like that my mission in life was to go back to where I had come from.
Since 2005, Bates has coordinated street festivals like this one to encourage peace in cities around central Illinois.
All the communities got the common thread. You got poverty, you got low income, and with that a lot of times, it comes low self-esteem and a lack of identification. People actually feeling or understanding their worth. And that's why it's so important for God to be in the equation.
Bates says churches need to take a greater role in addressing those problems. He says that means addressing needs both physical and spiritual.
And I believe that every human being has a place in their life or maybe a hole, if you can say, that need to be filled. And if that hole doesn't get filled or if that place doesn't get filled, anything can get in there with anybody. It's not just people in the street. There's lawyers that's addicted to crack cocaine. There's lawyers, doctors that's addicted to heroin.
Other parts of the community are stepping up too. In Urbana, Carl Foundation Hospital is investing in programs like this one called Healthy Beginnings. It's designed to help families grow healthy.
The one thing that we knew that we could do very, very well was to bring as healthy kids as we could out into the world and help keep them on that trajectory that they were meant to be on, working with families and working with our partners along the way. And so it was really important as we looked out into our community and we could see growing disparity in different neighborhoods, especially underserved areas. And it didn't matter what lens we looked at, as we looked at it through a healthcare lens, or we looked at it through the education sector lens, or we looked at it through the violence lens. It was telling us that these same areas really needed more help and support.
Ooh, I like what you're doing.
In schools, teachers and staff are taking stock of students' trauma and adjusting how they handle it.
When a kid has experienced trauma, they go right into that reactive brain, and they go into those 3 phases of reaction, the fight, flight, or freeze, and their executive functioning capability is not active at all. And as that continues to happen, the prefrontal cortex, it actually diminishes even more the more stress that a student goes through. So you have to build your environment in such a way that it allows for the regeneration of that, and that's the pliability of our brains, is that it can actually restructure and remap in different ways if it's provided the right context to do that.
You can feel how students respond to you and their excitement to come to school. Not every day is perfect. We still have students that need to come and regulate, and we're still working on those skills. But they know that we're here and that we're going to continue with them and work with them. And it helps with the parents too, because then our parents trust us.
At Crossing Healthcare, staff have started universal screenings for adverse childhood experiences.
Frequently, we've had adults sit on our couches for the first time and disclose histories of trauma and abuse for the first time. And also never making the correlation or the connection with, oh, this is why maybe my marriage didn't work. or maybe this is why, you know, I've struggled as a parent, or maybe this is why my patience is short with my children, or a host of things. I never related those things to my trauma.
One murder is one murder too many.
In January, Decatur leaders announced a community coalition to study violence in the city and recommend action.
It will happen, and it will happen because the people who you saw here today will be committed to making it happen.
In January, Attorney General Kwame Raoul called on all Illinois officials to tackle violence.
The level of violence we experience within our state is unconscionable. There should be no public official anywhere in Illinois who does not take responsibility for doing his or her part to address it.
Still, community leaders say bringing peace takes all of us. Police say it takes commitment from gun owners.
Secure your guns. You know, that just sitting in your house is not secure. I secure my guns. If I'm not home, that gun's probably with me. And if it's not with me, it's locked up somewhere.
It also takes courage from witnesses, courage to share what they've seen and testify in court.
We come to court and testify, stand up, do the right thing, and that way we can get convictions against these people. You know, there's a small segment of the population that causes the majority of the crime.
But maybe most of all, it takes a little love and care from all of us.
And so that might be volunteering at the Boys and Girls Club, or that might be becoming a mentor, a big brother, a big sister. That might just be being present for your own family.
And even more basic, one of the things that we found in pediatrics oftentimes is when families are in crisis, they don't have the ability to reach out. Right. Something as simple as having your phone available to your neighbor who doesn't have one.
As a community, we need to identify those particularly strong male role models and encourage them to get involved, to go back to the schools, to engage in conversation and dialogue that encourages children to see themselves in a positive light.
Well, but one of the things that I think that's going to happen, that has to happen in order for people's lives to change, that individual has to change from the inside.
If you take the time, I think, and get young people to start feeling like they're part of the conversation. Too many people don't feel like they're a part of the conversation.
Just keep your eyes open. You know, talk to the kids and not just reporting issues. Some of the men in the neighborhood, if you're a decent guy and you're raking your yard on a Saturday afternoon, you see the boys walking down the street, take a minute and stop and talk to them. You know, be someone they can look up to. Give them a positive word. If you see them doing something, call them out on it. Say, hey, I saw you over there doing that. You don't want me to go and tell your mom. Speak positive words to them.
Yes, it's overwhelming. But if we take it, again, one person at a time, one neighborhood at a time, one program at a time, we really can start to have our successes.
Thanks for joining us tonight. Remember to join us again in just a few minutes on our WAND Facebook page, where you can take part in that live panel discussion about some of the issues we've brought up tonight. For all of us at WAND News, good night.